You've been lied to. Not by one person, not by accident, but systematically, repeatedly, and almost universally by every health source you've ever trusted. Your doctor told you to stop eating potatoes. The diabetes pamphlet in the waiting room told you to avoid them. The blood sugar guide you downloaded at 2 in the morning told you they were dangerous. And you believed it, because why wouldn't you? These are professionals. These are experts. These are people who went to school for a decade to understand the human body. So, you cut out potatoes. You said goodbye to a food you genuinely loved. You sat at family dinners watching everyone else enjoy something warm and comforting while you pushed a few lettuce leaves around your plate, feeling like you were doing the right thing. And maybe your numbers got a little better, maybe they didn't. But either way, you accepted the loss, because that's responsible people do when their health is on the line. Here's the thing, though. What if that sacrifice was based on incomplete information? What if the real story about potatoes and blood sugar is so much more nuanced, so much more interesting, and so much more hopeful than anyone ever took the time to explain to you? What if there's a preparation method, one single change that takes about 5 minutes that can reduce the blood sugar spike from a potato by up to 33%, and in some clinical studies, even more than that? Not a supplement, not a prescription, not some exotic ingredient you've never heard of, just a specific way of preparing the exact same food you already know and love. That's what this is about. And the fact that this research has been sitting in peer-reviewed journals for over a decade, published by institutions like Lund University and featured in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition without ever making its way into a standard doctor's appointment, should genuinely make you angry. Not because doctors are hiding something, but because the system we've built around healthcare is so rushed, so overwhelmed, so focused on prescription pads and 15-minute appointments that the actual food science never gets communicated. Tonight, that changes. But before we get into the solutions, and there are 7 of them, ranked from least powerful to most powerful, you need to understand what actually happens inside your body when you eat a potato. Because once you see this clearly, everything else I'm going to tell you will click into place in a way that makes it unforgettable. So let's say you sit down for dinner. There's a baked potato on your plate, golden brown, smelling incredible, maybe with a little butter on top. You eat it. It feels normal. It tastes great. Nothing dramatic is happening on the surface. But inside your body, something that can only be described as a metabolic emergency is beginning to unfold. Within 15 minutes of that first bite, glucose starts flooding into your bloodstream. Not a gentle trickle, not a slow, manageable rise, a flood. A wave of sugar hitting your blood with the kind of speed and intensity that your body was simply not designed to handle on a repeated, daily basis. By the 30-minute mark, your blood sugar has typically spiked somewhere between 60 and 100 points above where it started. To put that in perspective, a reading that starts at a healthy 90 can hit 180 or higher, which is a level associated with organ stress, blood vessel damage, and the kind of long-term deterioration that eventually shows up as neuropathy, kidney disease, or vision problems. Your pancreas, that small but absolutely critical organ sitting behind your stomach, goes into overdrive. It detects the spike and starts pumping out insulin as fast as it possibly can, trying to clear the glucose from your bloodstream before it causes damage. Now here's where the story gets particularly painful for anyone over 60, and this is the part that most doctors genuinely don't have time to explain. As you age, your cells become less responsive to insulin. The technical term is insulin resistance, and it's one of the most common and least discussed consequences of aging. What it means in practice is that even when your pancreas is pumping out enormous amounts of insulin, your cells aren't opening up the way they should. The glucose lingers in your blood. It stays there, circulating, doing damage, stressing every system it touches. Your kidneys are filtering at overdrive capacity. Your blood vessels are being exposed to sugar concentrations they weren't built to sustain long term. And your eyes, your nerves, your brain, all of them are absorbing the collateral damage of a system that's been pushed past its limits. And then, as if that weren't enough, there's the aftermath. 2 to 3 hours after that potato, the massive insulin response your pancreas generated finally catches up to the glucose level, and it doesn't just bring it back down to normal, it overshoots. It drops your blood sugar below normal. Now you're hypoglycemic, you're shaky, you're anxious, you're inexplicably hungry even though you ate a full meal 2 hours ago.
And your body, which is brilliant in its own chaotic way, sends you a signal, an urgent, compelling craving for more carbohydrates. Your brain wants sugar fast because your blood sugar was low and that feels dangerous. So you reach for something. A cracker, a piece of bread, another potato, a cookie, and the whole cycle starts over. Spike, crash, crave, repeat. This is the blood sugar roller coaster, and it isn't just uncomfortable to ride, it is genuinely, measurably destructive over time. Research has confirmed that repeated glucose spikes from high glycemic foods can cause what scientists call beta cell exhaustion, where your pancreas literally wears out from the constant demand of overproduction. And here's the brutal truth. If you're over 60, even if you've never been diagnosed with diabetes, your pancreas has been dealing with this for decades. Every spike, every insulin surge, every crash adds to the accumulated wear on a cluster of cells that cannot regenerate. Every time you eat a fresh, hot potato without any preparation, you're asking those already tired beta cells to sprint, and eventually they can't sprint anymore. Now you need to understand specifically why potatoes are so much worse than other starchy foods, because this is where the science gets genuinely fascinating. The starch inside a potato is dominated by a molecule called amylopectin. And what makes amylopectin so dangerous for blood sugar is its structure. It's branched, meaning it spreads out in all directions like a tree with hundreds of limbs. That branched structure gives your digestive enzymes a massive surface area to attack. They can break it down from dozens, sometimes hundreds of points simultaneously. That's why the glucose from a potato hits your bloodstream so fast. There's almost nothing stopping it. Compare that to another type of starch called amylose, which is linear, compact, and much harder for enzymes to digest efficiently. Amylose digests slowly, releasing glucose gradually, causing a far smaller, far more manageable blood sugar response. Most foods that are considered low glycemic get that rating precisely because their starch is either rich in amylose or structured in a way that resists rapid enzymatic breakdown. The potato, especially the common russet, is the opposite of that, heavily amylopectin dominant, rapidly digestible, and brutally efficient at flooding your bloodstream with glucose in the shortest window possible. But here's where this story takes the turn that changes everything. Under the right conditions, you can actually force amylopectin to rearrange itself into structures that behave more like amylose. You can physically change the molecular architecture of potato starch so that your digestive enzymes can no longer break it down with that devastating efficiency. And every single method I'm about to walk you through works on this same fundamental principle, slowing down the rate at which starch converts to glucose. Some methods do it modestly, one does it dramatically, and when you layer them together, you get a cumulative effect that transforms a potato from one of the worst foods for blood sugar into something your body can actually handle. Let's start with the weakest method and work our way up to the most powerful one, because the contrast will help you understand exactly how much each strategy contributes and why some common advice is just barely better than nothing.
Method 6 is something you've definitely heard before, and it's the one that honestly frustrates me the most because it's presented as though it's actually solving the problem. Just eat a smaller portion. Your doctor has almost certainly said this to you at some point. A little bit of potato is fine, just watch your portion size. And look, the math behind this advice isn't technically wrong. If you eat half a potato instead of a whole potato, you're consuming fewer total grams of carbohydrate, and that means a lower total glucose load for your body to process. That's arithmetic, not medicine. But here's what this advice completely fails to account for. The glycemic index of a potato doesn't change based on how much of it you eat. A quarter cup of mashed potato, which is roughly the size of a golf ball, still has a glycemic index sitting in the 80s. The danger isn't just the quantity, it's the nature of what you're eating. Think of it this way. If someone offers you a full cup of gasoline to drink versus half a cup, both are still gasoline. You still can't drink either one safely. The fundamental problem hasn't been addressed, just slightly reduced. For someone with meaningful insulin resistance, even a moderate glycemic load from a high glycemic index food can trigger a response that's disproportionate to the amount consumed. Small portions still spike blood sugar, they just spike it slightly less. And for most people over 60, slightly less isn't nearly good enough to prevent the cascade of damage we just talked about. So why is this even on the list? Because it's better than nothing.
And because I want you to understand the baseline, this is where 90% of dietary advice stops, and it's genuinely inadequate. It's like telling someone with a leaking roof to put out fewer buckets. Fewer buckets is technically better, but the roof is still leaking. Method 6 is where we start adding layers that actually change the physical behavior of the food itself, not just the quantity. And this one requires the smallest possible behavior change because all it asks you to do is stop doing something you're currently doing. Specifically, stop peeling your potatoes. The skin of a potato contains fiber, about 2 grams per medium-sized potato, which doesn't sound like a lot, but fiber does something very specific and very useful in the context of blood sugar. It creates a physical barrier that slows down enzymatic access to the starch inside. Think about it like wrapping a piece of candy in cellophane versus leaving it completely unwrapped. The unwrapped candy begins dissolving the moment it touches moisture. The wrapped one forces your digestive system to work through a layer first before it can access the sugar inside. When you eat a potato with the skin intact, that fiber integrates into the digestive process and creates a genuine, measurable, though modest, delay in glucose absorption. Studies show a roughly 10 to 12% reduction in glycemic response compared to a peeled potato. Not dramatic, but real. And crucially, it adds to everything else. These methods are cumulative. You don't pick one and ignore the rest. You stack them, and every percentage point of reduction compounds with the others. What this also means, and this is critical, is that mashed potatoes are arguably the single worst preparation method for blood sugar management. Not only have you removed the skin and its fiber barrier, you've completely destroyed the cellular structure of the starch, breaking it down into a smooth, pre-digested paste that your digestive enzymes can attack with almost no resistance whatsoever. The glycemic index of mashed potatoes sits between 87 and 90, higher than most candy bars. Instant mashed potatoes are even worse because industrial processing has already done most of the enzymatic work for you before the food ever reaches your mouth. Method 5 is where the research starts to get genuinely compelling and where we move beyond the potato itself and start thinking about what surrounds it on your plate. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition tested something that seems almost too simple to be meaningful. They measured the glycemic response when people ate a plain potato compared to when they ate the exact same potato alongside a chicken breast, a small amount of oil, and a side salad. The results were extraordinary. The glycemic index of the pure mashed potato in that study was 108, which is in the range of pure glucose. With the protein and fat added to the meal, it dropped to 54. That is a 50% reduction without changing a single thing about the potato itself, just by changing what you ate alongside it. The mechanism behind this is twofold and well understood. First, protein and fat slow what scientists call gastric emptying, which is simply the rate at which your stomach pushes its contents down into your small intestine, where glucose absorption actually happens. When you eat protein and fat with a starchy food, your stomach holds everything together longer, releasing the mixture gradually rather than dumping it all at once. Instead of a glucose wave hitting your small intestine at the 15-minute mark, it arrives slowly over 60 to 90 minutes. The second mechanism involves a hormone called GLP-1, which stands for glucagon-like peptide 1. You may have heard this name recently in the context of popular diabetes and weight loss medications. Protein consumption stimulates GLP-1 release, and GLP-1 does two important things. It slows digestion even further, and it helps your pancreas produce insulin more effectively, meaning you get a better, more calibrated insulin response alongside a slower glucose curve. The practical rule here is simple and absolute. Never eat a potato alone. Always pair it with a solid protein source and a fat source. Method 4 is the one that surprises people most because it sounds like folk medicine but turns out to be rigorous, peer-reviewed science. We're talking about vinegar. Specifically, we're talking about the acetic acid in vinegar and its effect on blood sugar metabolism. Researchers at Lund University in Sweden, the same institution behind much of the chilled potato research, ran a controlled study testing 4 different potato preparations: freshly boiled potatoes, cold stored potatoes with a vinaigrette dressing, and white bread as a control. All 4 meals contained the same amount of available carbohydrate. The findings were remarkable. Cold storage alone improved the blood sugar response, but when vinaigrette dressing was added to the cold-stored potatoes, the combination produced the lowest glycemic and insulin response of any preparation tested. To understand why, you need to know that acetic acid, the active compound in all vinegars, does 3 specific things in your digestive system. First, it inhibits an enzyme called alpha amylase. This is the enzyme present in both your saliva and your small intestine that's responsible for breaking starch molecules into glucose. When alpha amylase is inhibited, starch digestion slows measurably. Second, acetic acid delays gastric emptying through a mechanism that's independent of protein and fat, meaning the effects are additive when you combine vinegar with a protein-rich meal. Third, and this is genuinely what surprised me when I first encountered this research, acetic acid appears to directly improve insulin sensitivity in skeletal muscle tissue. A systematic review and meta-analysis published in the journal Diabetes Research and Clinical Practice confirmed that vinegar intake can meaningfully reduce postprandial glucose and insulin responses, particularly when consumed alongside high glycemic meals. The practical rule is simple and absolute. 1 to 2 tablespoons of any vinegar, apple cider vinegar works well, but white wine or red wine vinegar are equally effective because it's the acetic acid that matters, not the flavor. Mix it in a glass of water and drink it 5 to 10 minutes before eating. Or even simpler, dress your potatoes with an olive oil and vinegar mixture. You get the fat pairing from method 5 and the acetic acid from method 4 in a single step. One important caution. If you're currently taking medications that lower blood sugar, adding vinegar to your routine could push your levels too low. Talk to your doctor before implementing this one. Seriously. Method 3 is about timing, and this one requires no change to the food at all. It requires a change to when you eat it. Most people eat their heaviest starchy foods at dinner. Mashed potatoes with roast chicken at 7 in the evening, a baked potato alongside steak at 8 in the evening, fries with a burger late at night. And while the food itself is the obvious focus, the timing is silently multiplying the damage in a way that almost nobody talks about. Here's why. Your insulin sensitivity, which is your cell's ability to respond to insulin and efficiently absorb glucose, changes significantly throughout the day. It follows your circadian rhythm, your internal biological clock that governs virtually every process in your body. In the morning and early afternoon, your cells are maximally responsive to insulin. They open up readily, they accept glucose efficiently. Your pancreas doesn't have to work nearly as hard to manage a given glucose load. But as the evening approaches, insulin sensitivity drops significantly. The same food that causes a moderate blood sugar response at noon can cause a dramatically larger spike at 7 in the evening, not because the food changed, but because your body's capacity to process it changed. Multiple peer-reviewed studies on circadian glucose metabolism have confirmed this pattern repeatedly. Your body is essentially structured to process carbohydrates earlier in the day, and its ability to do so degrades progressively as the evening progresses. For people over 60, this effect is even more pronounced because age-related insulin resistance tends to be substantially worse in the evening hours. This means that moving your starchy carbohydrates, including potatoes, from dinner to breakfast or lunch can reduce their blood sugar impact by roughly 25 to 30% without any other change. That's not a small number. That's the equivalent of switching from a dangerous preparation to a significantly safer one just by shifting your meal timing. I know it sounds counterintuitive. Potatoes for breakfast sounds strange if you've spent your entire life thinking of them as a dinner food, but a small portion of roasted potato wedges with eggs and vegetables at 8 in the morning is something your body handles in an entirely different metabolic context than the same food at 7 in the evening.
Method 2 is the one that floors people most consistently, and I genuinely believe it's one of the most underrated blood sugar management strategies in existence. It costs nothing, it adds no preparation time, it requires no equipment, no supplements, no special ingredients. All it changes is the order in which you eat the foods already on your plate. The research on food sequencing has become increasingly solid over the past decade. A study published in Diabetes Care, the official journal of the American Diabetes Association, tested what happens when people with type 2 diabetes eat their carbohydrates last versus first in a meal. Same food, same quantities, same total calories, same everything, except the order. When participants ate their vegetables and protein first and saved their carbohydrates for last, their peak glucose levels were reduced by 44% compared to when they ate carbohydrates first. 44% from the exact same meal. A Japanese research team followed patients with type 2 diabetes for 2.5 years using this single approach, eating vegetables before carbohydrates at every meal, and found sustained, meaningful improvements in long-term blood sugar control. The mechanism is the same one we've been building throughout this entire list. Vegetables create a fiber matrix in your stomach. Protein triggers GLP-1 and slows gastric emptying. By the time the potato arrives in your digestive system, everything is already moving slowly. Your stomach is partially occupied. Your digestion has shifted into a lower gear. The glucose from the potato trickles in gradually instead of arriving all at once. The practical protocol could not be simpler. When you sit down to eat, start with your non-starchy vegetables, whatever is on your plate, salad, broccoli, green beans, asparagus. Eat that first. Then eat your protein, your chicken, your fish, your eggs. If you can, wait 5 to 10 minutes before moving to the starch. Then, and only then, eat the potato. That's the entire intervention. You don't change what you eat, you just change when, within the meal, you eat it. And the science says you cut your blood sugar spike nearly in half. Now, before I reveal the single most powerful method on this list, the one that changes the potato at a molecular level, I need to stop and warn you about 4 specific combinations that will cancel out everything you just learned. These aren't opinions. These are research-backed patterns that are provably destructive to blood sugar control. And if you're making any of these mistakes, they're likely responsible for blood sugar readings that confuse and frustrate you. The first and most common mistake is eating a potato with a sugary drink. Soda, sweet tea, fruit juice, any of these consumed alongside a potato creates a perfect storm of simultaneous glucose floods. The liquid sugar hits your bloodstream even faster than potato starch because it requires essentially no digestion. So while your body is already dealing with the glucose wave from the potato, it's also being hit by a second, faster wave from the drink. Your pancreas is trying to respond to 2 separate attacks at once. And don't think diet soda is a safe swap here, because artificial sweeteners trigger what's called a cephalic insulin response, where your body releases insulin simply from tasting something sweet, even when no actual sugar is present. This disrupts your insulin rhythm and can interfere with blood sugar stability in its own right. Drink water. If you're using the vinegar protocol, drink vinegar water, but never a sweet drink alongside a starchy meal. The second mistake is stacking a potato with other refined starches, a burger with fries, a baked potato alongside dinner rolls, hash browns with toast. When you combine multiple high glycemic foods in a single meal, you're not adding their effects, you're multiplying them. There's no protein, no fiber, no fat buffer anywhere in that meal to slow anything down. It's pure rapid digesting starch, and the glucose load hits your blood in a wave that even a healthy pancreas struggles to manage efficiently. For someone with any degree of insulin resistance, it's overwhelming. The third mistake is the combination of a late-night potato with no physical activity followed immediately by sleep. We've already covered the timing problem, but this specific combination is in a category of its own. When you eat a high glycemic food late at night, your insulin sensitivity is at its lowest for the day. Your muscles are inactive and therefore not pulling glucose out of the blood at any meaningful rate. And then you go to bed, your metabolism slows further, and your liver, which produces glucose overnight through a process called gluconeogenesis, adds even more sugar to your bloodstream in the early morning hours. This is how people wake up with fasting blood sugar levels in the 140s and 150s and genuinely have no idea what caused it. The fourth mistake is overcooking. The more aggressively you cook a potato, especially through boiling or mashing, the more thoroughly you break down the physical structure of the starch granules. You're essentially pre-digesting the potato for your own digestive enzymes, making their job trivially easy and dramatically accelerating the glucose release. Mashed potatoes and instant potatoes consistently produce the highest glycemic responses of any potato preparation. In some research, even higher than French fries, because at least frying coats the exterior in fat, which creates at least some barrier to digestion. Fresh, hot, overcooked potato has a glycemic index approaching 95, which puts it among the highest glycemic foods on the planet.
And now, method 1, the single most powerful thing you can do to change how a potato affects your blood sugar, the thing backed by multiple universities, published in peer-reviewed journals, confirmed in repeated studies across different countries and different populations, and yet almost completely absent from standard dietary advice. Here it is. Cook your potato. Any method you prefer. Boil it, bake it, roast it, it doesn't matter. Then put it in the refrigerator for a minimum of 12 hours. Overnight is perfect. 24 hours is even better. Then reheat it. Microwave, oven, stovetop, again, it doesn't matter. Cook, cool, reheat. 5 minutes of actual effort. That's the entire intervention. What sounds like a simple logistical change is actually a profound molecular transformation. When you cook a potato, the starch granules absorb water, swell, and become what scientists call gelatinized. Gelatinized starch is maximally accessible to digestive enzymes. It's soft, open, and breaks down with extraordinary speed. This is exactly why a freshly cooked potato spikes blood sugar so aggressively. But when you take that cooked potato and cool it in the refrigerator, something remarkable happens at the molecular level. The amylose chains within the starch, remember those linear, compact molecules that resist enzymatic breakdown, begin to realign. They form tightly packed crystalline structures through a process called retrograding. These new structures are classified by scientists as resistant starch type 3 or RS3, and resistant starch, as the name suggests, resists digestion. Your small intestine enzymes cannot efficiently break it down. Instead of being absorbed as glucose, it passes through to your large intestine, where your gut bacteria ferment it and produce short-chain fatty acids, particularly a compound called butyrate, which has been shown in research to directly improve insulin sensitivity and reduce systemic inflammation. So not only are you absorbing less glucose from the potato, the portion that passes through is actively making your metabolic system work better.
Research published in the European Journal of Clinical Nutrition demonstrated that cold storage of boiled potatoes increased their resistant starch content from approximately 3.3% to 5.2% on a starch basis. A study in the journal Nutrients confirmed that chilled potatoes produced measurably lower glucose spikes and insulin levels compared to freshly cooked potatoes. And the finding that I find most remarkable, this resistant starch persists even after reheating. The crystalline amylose structures formed during cooling are thermally stable. Reheating to a normal serving temperature reverses only about 20 to 25% of the resistant starch that formed during cooling. The net result is that the final product, a reheated potato that was previously chilled, contains dramatically more resistant starch than the same potato eaten fresh. Clinical studies show this cook, cool, reheat method reduces the blood sugar spike from potatoes by 25 to 40%. And it gets even better. Research published in the International Journal of Food Sciences and Nutrition found that repeating the cycle, cooking, cooling, and reheating multiple times, further increases resistant starch content with each cycle. 3 complete cycles produced significantly more resistant starch than a single cycle, which means if you cook a batch of potatoes on Sunday, cool them overnight, reheat and eat some on Monday, cool the leftovers again, reheat and eat on Tuesday, each successive portion you're eating has undergone additional retrogradation and contains even more resistant starch than the batch before it. Here's what this looks like in actual practice, because I know some part of your brain is saying this sounds complicated. It's not. On Sunday evening, you boil or bake 6 medium potatoes. That takes about 30 minutes, mostly hands-off time while you do other things. You let them cool on the counter for half an hour, then put them in a covered container in the refrigerator. That's it. That's your Sunday. 5 minutes of actual effort, maybe 10 if you're being generous. Monday morning or at lunch, you pulled 2 potatoes out of the fridge, you slice them up, toss them in a pan with a splash of olive oil and a drizzle of vinegar, maybe some garlic and rosemary if you're feeling it, and reheat them for 10 minutes. You eat them alongside your eggs or your chicken breast, having already eaten your vegetables first. Tuesday, the same thing, with 2 more potatoes that have now completed a second cooling cycle. Wednesday, the last 2. 1 cooking session, 3 days of potato meals that have a fundamentally different biochemical effect on your blood sugar than anything you've been eating before.
And here's a delightful piece of accidental food science that made me smile when I first encountered it. Traditional potato salad, the kind made with cooled potatoes, olive oil, and vinegar, is actually one of the lowest glycemic potato preparations you can eat. It naturally incorporates the cook-cool method for the resistant starch transformation. It uses vinegar dressing for the acetic acid protocol. It includes fat from the olive oil for gastric slowing. Grandmama's potato salad turns out to have been doing more metabolically sophisticated work than anyone realized. Now, let's put all 7 of these together, because the cumulative effect is what makes this system genuinely extraordinary. Start with method 1, the cook-cool-reheat cycle, and you've already transformed the starch at a molecular level, reducing your blood sugar spike by 25 to 40%. Add method 2, food sequencing, eating your vegetables and protein before the potato, and you pick up another 44% reduction in peak glucose. Layer in method 3, eating the potato at breakfast or lunch rather than dinner, and your insulin sensitivity is at its highest, adding another 25 to 30% of protection. Use method 4, the vinegar protocol, and you're inhibiting the enzymes that break down starch, slowing gastric emptying and improving insulin sensitivity through a completely separate mechanism. Apply method 5, pairing the potato with a substantial protein source and a fat, and you're further slowing gastric emptying and stimulating GLP-1. Leave the skin on with method 6, and you've added a fiber barrier to slow enzymatic access. And avoid the 4 deadly combinations with method 7's foundational lesson about portion awareness and food pairing. When you stack all of these together, you are not making a modest improvement to a dangerous food. You are fundamentally changing the metabolic experience of eating that food. The potato that was your worst enemy becomes something your body can process, manage, and even benefit from, because that resistant starch is now feeding beneficial gut bacteria and producing compounds that actively improve your insulin function. This is not a miracle. It is not a gimmick. It is not something someone invented to sell you a program. It is published, peer-reviewed, reproducible science from universities in Sweden, Japan, Australia, and the United States, and it has been available for over a decade. The reason you didn't know about it isn't a conspiracy. It's the consequence of a healthcare system that runs on 15-minute appointments, where there simply isn't time to teach food chemistry. Your doctor isn't wrong to care about your blood sugar. The advice to be careful with potatoes isn't wrong. What's wrong is that the story always stops there, at restriction and deprivation, without ever getting to the part where science shows you how to reclaim the food you love. So here is your action plan, made as simple and direct as possible. Because knowing all 7 methods is worth nothing if they stay as ideas rather than habits. Tonight, cook a batch of 5 or 6 medium potatoes. Boil them, bake them, whatever you prefer. Let them cool, put them in the fridge, and leave them overnight for at least 12 hours. Tomorrow morning or at lunch, not dinner, pull them out, reheat them with a little olive oil and a vinegar drizzle. Eat your vegetables first, then your protein, then the potato last. Keep the skin on always. Never mash, never peel, never use instant. Pair every potato meal with a solid protein source. Never eat potatoes with bread, rice, pasta, or another starch in the same sitting. And if you want to see this working with your own eyes, get a simple glucose monitor and test yourself. Check your blood sugar before eating. Check it again at 30 minutes. Check it at 60 minutes. Write the numbers down. Do it for 1 week with these methods in place. Because the first time you see that post-meal reading after a properly prepared potato eaten the right way in the right order at the right time of day paired with the right foods, you are going to look at that number and think the meter is broken. It isn't broken. That's what it looks like when you take a food that science said would destroy your blood sugar and prepare it the way science also says can protect you from that destruction. 1 preparation change, 5 minutes, and a third less damage to the cells and vessels and organs you need to protect for the decades ahead.